Welcome to the May 1st special meeting of Glendale City Council. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members Alaджанян.
Present.
Divine.
Here.
Gharpetian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Mayor Sinanian.
Here. May we have the report, please?
Agenda for the May 1st, 2018 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Friday, April 27, 2018 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Next item, please.
For you today is the Director of Finance regarding financial status report March 31st, 2018. 1A is a motion to note and file the financial status report for the fiscal year 2017-18 third quarter ended March 31st, 2018. Use a resolution appropriating $19,197,257 in adjustments to the adopted fiscal year 2017-18 budget, of which $10,197,257 is a net increase in appropriation. Item 2 is Director of Finance Budget Study Session number 1. 2A is General Fund Budget and Forecast. B is General Fund Revenue Options, and C is All Departments, All Fund Budgets.
Thank you. Mr. Elliot or Ms. Beard?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I can't believe it's been a year since we've done budget, but here we are again with our first budget study session on May 1st, and we have an agenda for you as it relates to the kind of what we're going to look like today, and then at the end of the budget study session, we will discuss what's forthcoming in the budget study sessions that we have scheduled each Tuesday up until adoption in the first part of June. Basically, for our agenda for third quarter, as we always do, we're going to talk about our third quarter general fund update, which will include revenues and resources, as well as departmental expenditures. We're going to touch on the PERS rate stabilization fund as we have in the previous quarters and show you where we are as of today. We'll have some numbers as it relates to the projected year-end fund balance. And then when we move forward from that, we will talk about the 18-19 budget in terms of what's coming forward for the proposed general fund budget, revenue estimates and opportunities. And this is just kind of an in-depth preview, teaser if you would, as it relates to revenues. The organizational profile, what we look like, summary of all funds by type. We'll touch on the departmental dashboards as we have in the past, and budget adoption calendar coming forward in the month of May and ultimate adoption in the month of June. With that, we're going to go to the first quarter financial update, and to provide that information to you is Michele Flynn, Assistant Director of Administrative Services. So Michele.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'd like to first start off by thanking our staff in the finance department, our leader, Mr. Elliot, Adrine Isayan, our Deputy Director in charge of budget, Armen Harkalyan, our Deputy Director in charge of revenue and billing, as well as all the staff on both their sides. We have Mari, Jason, Sona, Yasmin, who's out at a class this morning, but they've done a great job in getting us to this point. All the departments, all the directors, as well as all the staff in their departments that support us throughout the budget process. It's a tremendous effort citywide, and we wouldn't be here without them. So thank you to everybody. So to start us off on the third quarter, we usually jump right into revenues, and as of March 31st, revenues received to date $125.5 million versus $121.1 million from last year. Same time last year, slight increase of a little over 3.5% on those revenues. At the mid-year, we brought to you some revenue forecast adjustments of about $1.7 million, primarily in the property tax, sales tax, and occupancy tax categories. We'll look at those in a little bit more detail on the next slide. At this point, we don't expect any other adjustments to our revenues. We will likely meet our forecast, so we are not bringing any more adjustments to you at this point. We did receive some one-time money from a large sales tax audit of a sales taxpayer here in Glendale. So we are going to be requesting an appropriation of $9 million to some special CIP projects for that one-time use of funds, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So looking at the details, this is where I need my glasses. First column there represents our adopted budget for all the different revenue types. You'll see the adjustments column there in the 1.7, about 3/4 of the way down. That was the adjustments that we did at the mid-year report to you. And then our revised resources in comparison to our actual receipts, we are about 58.3% received to date, or as of March 31st, primarily because we haven't received that large second installment in our property taxes, which comes due in April, so we haven't gotten that as of March 31. And sales tax trends a quarter or so behind, so we're a little behind on those, and that's normal for these types of revenues. So our total revised resources for the end of the year, for third quarter would be $232,165,000. That does include that one-time receipt of $9 million from the sales tax audit that was performed by the state. Moving on to expenditures. Department expenditures are tracking as expected. We are at a total of $155.5 million compared to $146.2 last year, around 71%. So we're pretty much at the same point as last year. All departments are below the 75% mark, which is what we would expect at the third quarter. And the $9 million, we're requesting that transfer from revenues in the general fund to go out to our CIP fund, Fund 401, to cover 4 different projects. And those are the purchase of the Maryland Street retail units of about $1.5 million, Maryland Street and alley improvements of $3 million, the Central Park block project of $2 million, and the Fremont Park renovation project of $2.5 million. Yes?
Just a question, please, Mr.
Yeah.
Adrine.
That $9 million one-time sales tax audit, who did that audit?
It's the state of California. It's formerly known as the State Board of Equalization. It's now called the California Department of Fee and Tax Administration. And they do what they do through the state. They monitor all the sales taxpayers throughout the state. They do their audits for various reasons, and we do get monies from time to time. This happened to be a large one.
I just want to make sure. So they went to different businesses, they didn't pay enough, so after the audit, so this is our share of extra.
Correct.
They went to one business.
Correct.
One business.
Who is this one business that has $9 million of taxes, which is 1% that we get?
Right.
So the underrepresented tax is about 90 million then, correct?
Correct.
And we can't say, we don't know?
We
Is it a
can't say.
enterprise? Enterprise?
We can't say what it is.
Why
That's
can't we
state
say
law.
who that is? State law?
Yes.
Code section 7056, to be exact.
Even
all
privately to the
it's
city
all
council?
confidential.
Is it private?
There's a resolution that council passes periodically naming the city manager, the finance director, and I think the revenue manager is the only ones that are privy to that information since it's all confidential.
Don't you think that the policymakers of the city need to know who that is to take action so this doesn't happen again? So other industries and businesses in the same like manner don't underpay their taxes? This is a big chunk of money that, imagine if there were 2 or 3 others like this, it would completely flip our budget.
I think it's an important distinction
is.
to make that it's not an underpayment initially.
Can we play
just
20
based-
questions?
And based on the type of business that it is, and based on when the business came to the city of Glendale and what they had gone through in another municipality, the State Board of Equalization had to do a study to see if the city of Glendale, based on the type of taxes that they pay, was actually privy to receiving those
Yeah,
taxes.
so it's not an issue of a tax scofflaw, it was more of an interpretation of the proper location.
Of what jurisdiction was entitled.
Right.
If I said, is it in the tech industry, would I be far off base? Retail tech?
I can't say.
Okay, I know who it is.
So there you go.
I
Can
know.
you whisper in my ear?
I will.
Okay, moving on to the detail of our expenditures by department. You'll see all of our departments listed, their adopted budget, the adjustments that were made during the year of about $7 million, and that includes the adjustments that were brought to you at our first quarter and at our mid-year, as well as adjustments that are brought periodically to council for additional appropriations. Our revised budget column, and then our actual expended, and you'll see on average we're at about 70%. And like I mentioned, all the departments are below that 75% target at this point, so we're trending very well. Towards the bottom of the screen, you'll see the pending approvals for the third quarter. We are asking for an additional $1,040,000 in appropriation for some one-time use of funds for some different things, and I'll get to those on the next slide. And then at the very bottom, once again, sorry, the $9 million appropriation that we're requesting for to transfer to our CIP fund in order to carry out those CIP projects. So our total revised budget matches our revenues of $232,165,000. The $1 million, $1,040,000 in pending budget adjustments that we're requesting for is on this screen, broken out by department. City Clerk is requesting $7,000 for some travel and training expenses for conferences. Community Development is requesting $224,000 for two items, the Community Plans and Outreach Effort, as well as the East-West Community Plan Historic Context and Resource Survey. Fire has multiple items of about $488,000. The Emergency Operation Plan, the equipment for various engines that they're purchasing, some upgrades to existing equipment, as well as some capital outlay items. Police is replacing 9 dispatch consoles in their communication center for a total of $270,000. And Public Works is requesting an additional 50 to perform some traffic impact studies based on the additional development related that's going on in the area.
Michele, before you go to the next slide, just to follow up on the PERS audit, the sales tax audit, it's still ongoing. It has not been finalized, so we may have some more one-time money that we receipt of that. They haven't completely finalized the assessment as yet, but we've received quite a bit so far. So we're we deemed one time and put it through the appropriation process. So there will likely be more once we get the final result. We've had a lot of conference calls with the state on the audit and their determination. It's an interesting way how they approach the audit, but we will likely receive more by the end of June.
But we don't believe it would be to the tune of $9 million.
No.
It would be
probably a few
somewhere
more.
between $1 to $3 million based on what we've been told.
So when you say one time, this is going back then several quarters of tax
Like 2.5
collection.
years.
Going forward, is there
There will be an
once
uptick.
they resolve those tax
we've built that
issues,
into the revenue estimates.
there's a little bit, okay.
Okay, so the total on these is $1,039,860. So that's on the resolution that we're requesting for approval today. Usually what we do at this point too is bring to you our results of our Section 115 PERS Rate Stabilization Fund. So to recap, we
Michele,
had
before you move on with that, I think Councilmember Devine had.
I did. The total for the ask, the resolution that you're asking for is like $1,050,000. You just mentioned the figure.
$1,039,000.
The list of the general fund.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're all general.
But you're asking in the resolution for $10 million?
Yes.
And I'm not sure where that's
It's the
that's coming from the
9 million
So
plus that, $1,040,000.
Yes. It's the
Oh,
9.
it's not 19? It's not 19
It is,
now?
okay. Yes, it is 19 in total, but we count the 9 twice, leaving the general fund and going into the CIP fund, because we have to appropriate it in the CIP fund and the general fund, so it doubles up.
Okay, so then that won't reflect in the reserve, the percent?
Correct.
The percentage, it's not?
It just goes through, yeah.
And we're still at 29 points?
Yes.
Yes.
The 9 has come in as revenue and it's going out in as a transfer. So that's an in and out. It does not impact your fund balance or your reserve there.
The
Yes.
reserve is still at 29.
This million is
calculated.
additional, and then there's another $157,000 in Fund 216. That will all add up to your $10 million that's requested on the net appropriation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the Section 115 rates, PERS Rate Stabilization Fund on our update for third quarter. As a recap, we did do 3 deposits in the summer of last year for a total of $26.5 million. We did those deposits in even increments of a little over $8.8 million each. We're in the moderate portfolio target allocation, which includes 3% in cash, 50% in equities, and 47% in fixed income. All those funds are actively managed by our portfolio managers. That's the option that we've selected, and the target annual net return is estimated at 5%. Quarter to date, at March 31, our year-to-date actual net return is currently 3.86%. And I'll show you that on this slide. So those light blue bars on the next slide show you the cumulative target return of 5% for each quarter, and the orange bars show you the actual net return that we've been earning every quarter, and that's on a cumulative basis. So you see, as we got into January of 2018, we had tremendous return compared to our target, and then the market did its little thing that it did, that it does periodically, and we've come back down as of March 31. The good news is we still are above our target, and we're still expecting to meet our target by the end of June. So total earnings to date is $846,143.
Quick question for you. I'm looking at this chart. So the orange one is the one that this is our income, right? The interest that we earned. Yes. So if the target is 5%, all the blue bars are 5%, right?
On a cumulative basis,
right.
Yes.
So the orange one is always higher than the blue bar. How is it that it's 3.8% now?
That's a cumulative return. So it's gone up and then it came back down. So you will see that on a cumulative basis at March 2018, it's not 5%. The target would be less than that. Jason, do you have what would it? It'd be about 3.75 as of March 31 would be our target. The 5% is on an annual basis.
Okay, got it. So our target is changing, not the, got it.
So if you look at the far right.
Why is our target changing? If it's annual basis 5%, so our target is in 1 month is 8%, the other month is 3%, and cumulatively is 5%? Is that what it is?
Well, we're looking to do 5% in a year, so during 8 months, we would look for a cumulative of 3 3/4, which we're exceeding. So if you look at the far right bar, that would be 5% on an annual basis.
For the June 18?
Yeah, as of June 18. So
Okay,
does that make sense?
So what you're telling me is that we lost $700,000 in our portfolio, which is 50% of it, 40% perhaps?
Of our net earnings.
Of our net earnings. I want to see these guys. Bring these guys to us. I want to know what their, we went through the moderate risk profile, right? I can imagine if we were out on these far out stocks and the stock market took a dump and, oh, there goes our money. But I would like them one day to come forth and explain this, what they're putting it into. That's a huge loss. That's $700,000, almost half of what our earnings had been. And I don't accept that from a moderate risk portfolio. I want to know what these guys are doing. That's not acceptable to me. Not at all. So
Since this
please,
was our first...
at some point in the future, this isn't a budget issue, but it's something that affects our budget. So at some point,
yeah, we can.
I want them right there to answer some questions for us.
We'll do that.
Okay. Then moving on to our projected year-end fund balance. We started the year at just under $88 million at 40.9% in our general fund. With what we are projecting our year-end savings to be, as well as the one-time adjustments that we are requesting of you today, and considering carryovers that we will have from this budget year going into next year, our projected ending fund balance for June 30th of 2018 will be $89,774,000. That's a net increase or net surplus of about $1.8 million, leaving us with 41.8% in our reserves. Now, once we take out the PERS stabilization fund deposit that we did of 26.5, we come down to $63,274,000, and that is at 29.4%. That is within the target of the council-approved policy for our reserve of 25 as the floor and 35 as our ceiling. So we're looking pretty good for the end of the year. So that pretty much concludes my update for you on the third quarter. I'm happy to take any other questions or comments you have. Staff is recommending that council note and file the financial status report as of March 31st of 2018. as well as approve the resolution of appropriation for the fiscal year 2017-18 third quarter budget adjustments.
Questions or comments from council? Thank you, Michele.
Mr. Mayor, if it's okay by you, if there are no other questions on the third quarter, there is an item before you.
You want a motion?
For a motion. If we can get that piece of it done, that way we can start the budget process for 18-19.
I have one question before we take that vote. On the, thank you, Mr. Mayor, general fund, the CDTFA, the audit, et cetera, and how we're spending that $9 million. Fremont Park renovation, aren't we spending DIF funds for that? Impact fees?
I believe so. Go ahead, Adrine. There's multiple sources. Adrine's got it right now.
Mayor Sinanian, members of council, Adrine Isayan, Deputy Director of Finance. There is $1.5 million in the development impact fee fund for those for that project.
So this just adds to it.
So in total, there's $4 million in the CIP fund and another $1.5 million in the development impact fee fund. And so this $2.5 million that we're transferring is just going against offsetting the 401 revenue.
To supplement what we have.
Correct.
So total $5.5 million is budgeted in the Fremont project.
And I have one last question. In our budget adjustments, slide 9, community development has about $250,000 for all that stuff, outreach, community plan, historic context and resource survey. This is just allocating the funding. This is not dictating the, we're not approving the actual commencement of that work.
Correct.
Because that's something that I want to get into and make sure that we're applying the appropriate level of scrutiny and not over scrutinizing and making sure that we're doing it as we see fit.
Basically, you're setting aside the monies for this program, and we will be before you to seek direction before we move forward with each of those pieces and any of the actual contracts that may come forward as well.
Okay.
And this is similar to what we've done for South Glendale Community Plan?
North Glendale as well as now South Glendale, correct.
Any more questions?
I'll move the items.
Second.
Okay, we have the roll call, please.
Council members Agajanian?
Yes.
Devine?
Yes.
Gharpetian?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Mayor Sinanian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Next item was read into the record is Director of Finance Budget Study Session number 1.
So now the fun begins. I will do my best to motor through this as quickly as possible. First, to echo what Michele said, thank all the staff. This room is filled with folks from different departments that work on the budget process all year long. And as we've talked about in the past, it's become almost an all-year effort putting the budget together with the culmination of the budget study sessions and ultimately adoption. But just to briefly educate everybody, the process from the budget staff's perspective starts in October, where we start looking at cost allocation plans. In November, we start developing the internal service fund rates. That's what we charge the other departments for ISD services and insurance and so on. We have the citywide kickoff in February where we interact with the departments for the first time and kind of lay out the ground rules after having met with the city manager, what the forthcoming budget will look like and establish the key dates and the calendars for moving forward. Again, in February, we open up the module, our budget module after the kickoff, and start preparing the budget for all 77 funds. That number has grown, and I'll show you some of the detail later. That includes the charter funds that we have for GWP. It's when we issue the CAFR at the end of the year, we collapse those into water and electric, but we have a number of funds that we now have to do based off the lawsuit. We have all those charter funds that we budget to. 77 sets of books, 77 financial reports. Payroll is posted to just about every fund that we have. So a lot of detail goes into all those operations spread amongst the department. and we'll slice and dice that data as I go through the presentation. We'll primarily focus on the general fund up front, and then we'll get into the all the other funds at the back and what types of funds they are and what the budgets are. We move through into March, where we have our meetings with city manager. Then we have an all-hands meeting in April and really fine-tune the budget and get down to where we are today for the study session. A lot of work, a lot of time through the process. So let's start off with the general fund. We use up in the far right corner the $215 million. That's our baseline budget. You just saw that from the third quarter update. We go through, Armen goes through and looks at our forecast for our revenues. Property tax has been very, very strong. Sales tax, we've upped a lot of the estimates, conservative, but still, I think, realistic based on trend data and what we know from our consultants. We're adjusting the revenues up $13 million to get us to a $228 million general fund revenue, and then we're using a little bit of the economic development fund balance for total resources of $229 million. As I mentioned, the detail on the revenues, property tax is up about 9.5%. Sales tax is almost 9% increase based off our activity and the information we have from our sales tax consultant. Transient occupancy tax, the TOT from the hotels is going up. We have an addition of a new hotel, and I think we were adding more in the future, but that's been solid, so we're upping that. And then the electric fund transfer is 10% of the electric fund revenue. So looking at the expenditure side on appropriation, again, we start with our baseline budget from this current year at the $215 million. We have our additions itemized out in PERS and salaries and benefits for an additional amount of salaries and benefits at $13.4 million. The salary increases are all the COLAs in place for the various bargaining groups. And the PERS increase is we've shown you over and over that the PERS rates are going up each year, and we'll show you on the 5-year forecast what that looks like. We've had some change in our maintenance and operation, or M&O, in terms of liability insurance and some of the key areas. The fleet charge was reduced this year. The ISD service charge went up a little bit, and all the other categories in M&O went down about $2.5 million or $2.3 million. So the total general fund proposed budget is $227.7 million. So forecasting that out to the end of the year, what we think we would look like would be, given the revenues, resources we have against the appropriation, we would show a little bit of a surplus of $1.6 million. So you have a balanced budget with a little bit of surplus.
What was our general fund budget last year?
Adopted or adjusted? I guess.
Adopted.
Adopted budget for 17-18 was 215,042,945, so 215 million.
This figure right here. Up
250 and the year before?
The year before, I don't have it available. Give me 1 minute, we'll get it.
Okay. And a follow-up question on slide 17, when it says the adjustments, property taxes, like these are increases?
Those are increases in our
compared to last year?
Over last year.
Over last year. So property taxes were $4 million more this year compared to last year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm still looking at that one.
Let's
I'm sorry, the adopted 16-17 budget was 194.8 million.
94.
194,780,663, just to be exact, if you're gonna.
Thank you.
Sure.
So what does that do to our fund balance projection? We had that projected surplus of $1.6 million, gets us to about $64.8 million in surplus fund balance still at 28.6% above our 25% floor. To get a little more detail on just the salary and benefits, in terms of the $13.4 million, it's $6.3 million of that is in PERS, as we showed earlier. We had service level adjustments of $2.1 million. We've added 7 vacant positions, redirected them into the general fund from other departments within the city. And you can see the detail in terms of 4 being added in for community development, 1 into finance, 1 into human resources, 1 into police, and 1 into public works. The additional position for police was for an SRO, school resource officer. Some of the other additions were the $250,000 for police overtime, and then some other adjustments for a part of a police officer coming back to the general fund and some hourly wages.
And to touch on the school resource officer, Mr.
I'm sorry, go ahead and finish.
To touch on the school resource officer, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, as you know, we've had the discussion, and you brought it up before the City Council, in terms of the importance of adding possibly another school resource officer to the mix. And in conversations with the school district, hopefully we've come to the conclusion, and once they get their budget approved as well as we do, they would pay for half of the school resource officer, and we would pay for the other half for the addition of the 1 position. And this position would most likely be placed at Clerk, Magnet, in the north side of town, where an area where we don't have a school resource officer in the area, and just based on conversations with the district, we feel that that is the best place for this resource.
Okay, thank you. Question?
A follow-up question on our budget, or our income, basically, our revenues from 16-17 to 17-18. There's, if I'm not mistaken, there's about almost $20 million increase in our revenues. Am I correct? So did our expenses increase as well by $20 million? And if so, that's almost 10% of our entire general fund budget. How could the expenses rise from one year to another by 10% or $20 million?
Well, our primary driver is salary and benefits, and that includes the COLAs that we've agreed to for the different bargaining groups, along with our PERS increases. That's the chunk of our salary and benefit increases on the expenditure side. There's other increases in the M&O categories and capital outlay, of course, but the majority of it's salary and benefits. Our revenues correspondingly have been strong, and we've been able to balance the budget each year. Give or take, we always have a little bit maybe use of fund balance, but we have to present a balanced budget for all the expenditures we have.
No, I understand. I mean, balancing the budget is different than your expenses increasing by 10% or $20 million one year versus other. I would like to have a breakdown of that $20 million for the future budget study so we can compare, because I think we need to start.
Is that information not available now?
I don't have a slide for it, but we certainly can get it to you. We have a document that we track just about everything on the planet.
But it's mainly PERS, right? I mean,
It's
that's
mainly
what's
PERS.
killing us year after year. I mean, we're fortunate we're having increasing income to cover it.
That's exactly my point. I mean, if you have $20 million increase, your expenses go up almost exactly the same. So we need to be very careful as to if one year our revenues do not increase, what are we going to do?
Then
We went through a number of years like that several years ago, where we had to cut drastically to match our resources. Our expenditures were a lot higher. We had gaps of, I don't want to say 18 million, 15 million, 10 million in successive years, and we eliminated hundreds of positions, discontinued some services with those positions leaving to get to that balanced budget. Fortunately, our revenues are going up now.
And I think it's an important distinction and point to highlight, just based on the 5-year forecast, which we will be covering in a few slides. You will see that in years 3, 4, 5, we're not as balanced as we are today. And that is based on revenues coming in and based on the expenses that we have. And so that balance of making sure that the revenues match or exceed what the necessity is in terms of those expenditures has been an issue, I think, that the council has continued to grapple with. And as you all know, we're in the business of providing services by way of people to the community. And so the cost of those people, based on what we have to pay, along with the PERS costs, are increasing. And how do you balance that? And one of the things I think that council has done in terms of making sure that you're investing for the future, one of the items is the PERS stabilization fund. The others, as you all know, is making sure that the employees are paying a fair share of their PERS portion, which a lot of other jurisdictions aren't doing. And so we continue to have the conversation. We continue to have the conversation about making sure that we're structurally balanced and making sure that the services that we're providing them in a manner that is exceptional to the community, and that we should be in the business of providing the services that we are today. And we continue to have that conversation about, do we continue to provide certain services, or do we get out of certain lines of business? And so the conversation continues, most definitely.
And this budget includes the transfer of $20 million from GWP. So if you lose that as well, and not have 10% increase,
that's a whole different
you're
conversation.
going to have like $30 million. You'll be in a hole in
Very
1 year
quickly.
versus the next. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Mayor. And speaking of service, the additional position for the school resource officer, $229,000 for one officer on.
For one officer.
Fully loaded.
Pardon me?
Fully loaded with benefits.
Wow. Is that the chief or? I mean, that's a, wow.
For every $100,000 spent in terms of the benefit load, let's say on $100,000 for safety is
$87,500 on benefits. So the the benefit load for safety is 87.54% on average. So for every 100,000, you're incurring 87,500 in benefit expenses.
So that's for one fully loaded position, of which the school district would be paying for half if approved.
Okay, so to continue on the salary and benefits and the increases and decreases, primarily is an increase in workers' comp. The cost of workers' comp is going up, and again, we had the COLAs built in for GPOA 3.5%, POA sworn 3%, GCA 1.5%, GMA 1.5%, and hourly of 1.5%. We had a little bit of a reduction in the sick leave RHSP rate that we're charging out to the funds. Moving on to M&O, there's increases in transfers that we're moving over to the low-mod housing for the GSA loan repayment, and some other miscellaneous increases and decreases in that category. To recap, again, the $2.3 million in adjustments proposed for the general fund. We've broken them down by department. Again, it's adding various positions, 1 in finance, 4 in community development, 1 in HR, the SRO that we spoke of, and a position in public works. Those are not net new. Those are redirected from other departments. So I think we've only added 1 net headcount citywide for the entire budget process. These are new to the general fund, but not new to the total. So the forecast that we were just speaking of, we laid out with the 17-18 column here, and this where we're proposing to end up the year at $1.8 million. We've plugged in the 18-19 proposed budget, where you can see our resources at $229 million, and the baseline expenses for our appropriation side, and you can see the PERS line, where last year was $32 million. We're projecting $40 million this year, and then on out almost to $60 million in 22-23, and that's the lion's share of our salary and benefit increases. Of course, we reduce that with the cost share that the employees pay back. CIP is fairly nominal in terms of the increases year to year. So that gets us down to what we're projecting as surplus of a little bit of 1.6 million for this year. Given the numbers we know today, we'll have a slight deficit for next year, and then the deficit grows in years 3, 4, and 5 moving out. So looking at our overall 5-year forecasts, I think we've done a pretty good job in terms of keeping our appropriations as low as we can. The driver, again, is the PERS. Our revenues are strong, but we do have a mismatch in the out years in terms of expenditures at the current service levels to our revenues that we're bringing in. So what we wanted to do is touch on, what makes up our revenue base and potential opportunities we have looking at additional revenues to fund the services that we have in the city of Glendale.
Let's go back to that schedule which you were showing a little bit earlier. So what you're projecting is when we're going to have deficit?
You look out in the years 1920, we'll have a small deficit of 2.9 million, and then it increases in years 3, 4, and 5, or 2021 through 22, 23. This is based on what the information we know today, the trends of our revenues and our expenses. We know that PERS is going up. This could go up even higher, depending if PERS has good years or bad years. We don't necessarily see the impact because of their smoothing policies anymore, but we know those costs are going up.
No, but, okay. But then what we are doing not to be in that position? Whatever we have to do it now. Why we have to wait until to be in?
Yeah, what's our plan, I guess? How are we going to get out of this hole?
Wait a few minutes and I'll go through the revenues.
Glad you asked that question.
Prime the pump, we'll get right into it.
Okay. I don't have to wait until 3 years later, do I?
I agree. I would rather we do something now, frankly. And I mean, the solution is it's a mathematical equation. Either we up the revenues or reduce the expenses. Given the history that we have cut almost 400 individuals out of this organization, do we want to cut any more and eliminate services? That's a decision that the council can make, or do we want to look at revenue options?
But just to follow up on that, I think eliminating positions or reducing our labor force is not helping because, and I don't think it's the right thing, but our cost of employees today versus a few years ago when we let 25% of our employees go is the same because of the PERS. So by letting 25% of our employees go, we did not gain anything.
We kept the boat afloat.
I mean, yeah. So I don't think it's the solution to our issue. I mean, there should be a light at the end of this tunnel sometime, because like George Bush used to say, he said, "I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I entered the tunnel. It was a semi truck coming at me." So it's the same thing right now for us. The semi truck is just coming 100 miles an hour. So.
Well, it's important to say, though, that when we did cut those 400 or so positions, we maintained all our services. So that was an extra load on all of our employees to keep up with that. So they're under tremendous stress. Perhaps the same stress we're going to be under trying to fill this gap. But, I mean, that needs to be said. That was something that probably happened 2014 that we did that.
We started in
2012.
2009 and 10 in terms of the budgetary constraints that we were seeing here in the city of Glendale. And so we've been in that cut mode for majority of the time except for the last couple of years, really, where we have felt that the organization has been structurally balanced. But I think that structure is going off balance once again just based on the increased costs of PERS and everything else that we have talked about. The nice thing is Glendale's in a unique situation and position to have a 5-year forecast, and many other jurisdictions don't. And our ability to be able to forecast out pretty well has served us well to make decisions in advance of kind of that huge issue facing the city council in terms of that policy decision. And so I think it's prime for us to have that conversation regarding revenues. And even if no decision is made in terms of, we might be interested in specific revenues for the staff to go and explore, at least you'll have some time in the next months and year to be able to say, yes, move forward on these revenues now, don't move forward on any, come back with other options, et cetera. But I think it'd be important for us to have this conversation regarding the possibility of revenues, just based on what we see happening in other municipalities and around the state.
Excuse me. What I'm worried is for at least since 2010, 8 years, the businesses are thriving. And this is unprecedented, I think, because every 7 years we are having problems with the deficit and other stuff, as far as I remember, since Nixon's time. So if we are expecting that we're going to have a budget shortage of 6.9 million in 2021 and 2022 during that period, so then if the businesses are slow, then what will happen? How we will manage to take care of this deficit, which will be much more?
Yeah,
because you based on the money, collecting money at this time, which everything is thriving. So later, what will happen to this city? I mean,
Councilmember Najarian, I share your concern, which is why I have so many gray hair. I look at the business turns and cycles, and again, I think Armen is very conservative on our revenue estimates. Does it include a major recession? No. Do we have some blips here and there? Yes. We always have, and that's why we tend to be a little bit conservative on the revenues. That said, the cost structure is pretty well set in stone unless we reduce a head count in the general fund. We're primarily salaries and benefits in the general fund, so that's the driving cost in the general fund. The other, it's kind of a flip of the percentages of personnel to M&O expenses in the general fund. It's usually 80-20, 75-25 people in the general fund, and it's the reverse in most other funds. So the cost drivers are there, was kind of set in stone unless we reduce the head count in the general fund. Or we increase the revenues, which is why we wanted to talk to revenues about, or both, where we meet in the middle. So
let me interrupt you, Bob. I mean, I've always seen Glendale as one of the most efficiently run cities. We're always investing in the city to create more economic development, and I think we're doing a great job of that. But despite all that, we're not only, at chin level, but in the outgoing years, the water's above that thing. How are other cities, I mean, I don't want an answer necessarily, but I'm sure other cities are having a much more difficult time than Glendale is, in much more precarious situation. We've heard about our neighbors asking for another sales tax increase. But this at some point has to get to the state level, and I'd like at another meeting, maybe just for a brief moment, our government relations, who does that? Does Christine do that? Just tell us, is this getting to the state level where there's any hope for some state reform on the PERS system? Because, we just can't keep doing this. I mean, we can cover it maybe to 21, 22, but we'll be gone perhaps. And we're running out of good things to do to cover that. So let's, not at this moment, maybe at the beginning or end of another session, just get a brief synopsis as if there's any light at the end of the tunnel from Sacramento to help us out in this.
I imagine if anything is done on the state level, which is doubtful, it's going to be prospective. It's not going to be retroactive. So it's not going to really help us with our 22 to 26 problem.
Right. Well, we even did our tier 2, right? We have our different tiers. That's helping us in the out years, 30 years from now, maybe when that flows through. But anyway. Okay.
Yeah, Councilmember Najarian, you recall the slide we showed when we did the 115 trust. There's that huge bubble out in the 2034, 35, where we peak out on the PERS, and that's when the classics move their way out of the system. Assuming we can weather that storm another 15, 20 years, the PEPRA population will catch up, and we'll be able to afford it. Can most cities tolerate that? I don't know. I mean, I think we're pretty well structured, but I know it's a struggle for us, so I imagine it's a struggle for a lot of less funded cities throughout. I wish I had the answer. I agree. If there was some statewide reform on the pensions, perhaps, but I don't know what that would be at this point. I mean, I see stuff every day comes through the league or CSMFO, which is the finance officers. There's little traction in Sacramento on that.
Can I ask an off-the-wall question? What happens if there's an issue or there's the economic downturn and we cannot pay that $40 million or $50 million and close the gap? We don't have it. What's going to happen at that time?
There's been a couple cities that I know of, and I can't think of the name, but the very small cities that have stopped making their payments to PERS, they have completely reduced the pension checks to the recipients.
Oh.
So the retirees get the
So
short.
they get hit. If the city can't do it,
Correct.
sorry, you didn't contribute.
The only thing they get back is the portion they contributed to the system.
And the lawsuits are
And the lawsuits are
on their way.
piling up on that as
So,
well.
I mean, it's one thing to say that, but the lawsuits are on their way, and someone will have to pay.
I'm just playing the
at end.
devil's advocate.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm just.
But literally, if we had a downturn, we'd have to make significant cuts. And the organization's been there before. We've made significant cuts in the past, but not in most recent past. In the most recent past, the cuts that we made, again, as Mr. Najarian had said earlier, were in the bodies, but not necessarily service levels. And so, if we were unable to make payments, it would have to come at the cost of reduction of services. That's where we are today.
I understand, but our general budget is $215 million, and PERS is about $47 million in 2 years. That's almost 1/4 or 22% of our general budget that you have to cut.
It's a chunk, yep.
And
So let me jump
I don't know
into.
how much services we can cut out. But okay, let's move on.
You've seen a lot of these slides. We've updated a number of them. We've added to some just to kind of an overview of what our revenue sources are and what options we may have moving forward. You've seen this chart before, but we wanted to update it and show you what the general fund looks like in terms of our major revenue sources. On the stack in the blue and green on the left is what the total resources are. This is for last year. And where it goes. And police and fire make up the lion's share of the general fund budget, along with community development, public works, and so on and so forth, down to the internal service departments, balancing at the $215 million amounts. Again, about 70%, 68% or whatever it is between police and fire consume the general fund. So just a way of a primer, the property tax that we get from the citizens of Glendale is all via Proposition 13, of which came into being in 1978, established the 1% cap of the assessed value of the property, limited the increase to a 2% growth factor, up to a 2%, which it generally is, but there's been, I think, 2 times in the history of there where it has not been 2%. It can also go down via a Prop 8 adjustment, and I'll show that in a minute. It also established a 2/3 majority for special tax purposes moving forward. And this is, I don't want to say it's handcuffs at this point, but it is quite restrictive on what we get and how it was divided up. Prop 8, as I said, allows reductions in property tax. It really didn't play a big part until the recession. We saw a lot of Prop 8 adjustments, and I'll show you a chart on how that works. So just as an example, if somebody buys a house over here on the left at $450,000, that is the market value at the time of the purchase, and that becomes the assessed value. The assessed value is capped at the 2% growth, and it follows this green line as you move in up the years. The market value, on the other hand, could skyrocket of your property. The tax does not follow the market value. If the market value goes down and crosses back through the assessed valuation line here, this area here triggers a potential Prop 8 reduction. That can be done by the taxpayer, can appeal it, or as the county assessors did in the recession, they automatically reduced assessed values through a Prop 8, mass Prop 8 assessed value reduction. The kicker is when the values start going back up, if it bottoms out back down here, it can increase faster than the 2% to recapture the value until it crosses that line that would have been the 2% increase of Prop 13. So the cap is always the green line. If it does get a Prop 8 adjustment and goes down, it can go back up a lot quicker than 2%. But once it gets back to that cap of the assessed value, then it continues on that 2% growth versus going up farther. So again, we get all the downside, but really not much of the upside on the property tax. 218 was passed in 1996. I remember it like it was yesterday. These are the handcuffs that really dictate a lot more, and then Prop 26 that I'll talk about in a minute. This really established a lot more guidelines in terms of what a general tax is and a special tax requiring 2/3 of a vote for anything that you want to implement. Prop 26 came in and basically said everything is a tax unless you have one of these specific 7 exemptions for fees, which is why we do a very detailed fee study for the cost of fees to comply with Prop 26 in a lot of cases.
Mr. Elliot, you have a question?
Just a quick question. When you say special tax requires 2/3 of the voters' approval, that's the number of voters that participate in that election?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So basically supermajority.
Correct. If it's a special tax for a special purpose, it needs 2/3. If it's a general tax, it's 50 plus 1. If that wasn't bad enough with Prop 13, Prop 8, Prop 26, 218, now we have the Tax Fairness, Transparency, and Accountability Act that is supposedly coming on to the ballot. As I understand it, it's backed by big oil and big soda companies, beverage companies. It basically requires any tax to be a 2/3 supermajority, and it's retroactive for anything that happens in 2018. It prohibits city councils for doing a special election unless you declare an emergency. Again, this is the true additional handcuffs if this were to pass.
So special elections for taxes or special elections for any other issues?
For taxes.
For taxes. And can you explain to me the difference between general tax and a special tax?
General tax would be like a property tax or sales tax. It's voted on for general purposes, goes in the general fund. A special tax would be like a parcel tax for libraries. Could only be spent on library
Specific
or if
items.
it's landscaping or whatever other type of district you might have. Parks, for example, libraries, you could have a specific one for fire.
Thank you.
So looking at what we have in the general fund, again, we have 4 major revenues: property tax, which is the lion's share, sales tax, a close second at $41 million. Then we have our utility users tax, which is a tax on all our utilities, and I'll get into all the rates of all these, and we'll do a little comparison, tri-city comparison. And then we have our transfers from the utility. Property tax, as we spoke of, again, is the 1% of assessed value. The key thing here is of the 1% assessed, Glendale gets that 13.5 or 13.57 cents for every dollar generated in the city of Glendale. So graphically, and we've compared this in the past of our neighboring cities, of that $1, and this is the breakdown on the stack chart, Glendale gets 13.5 cents, Burbank gets about 18.5 cents, and Pasadena gets about 21 cents for every dollar. So we're at a fair disadvantage. How this came about was back in 1978, SB 154 established the proportionality of property tax to each agency under Prop 13. So based off the tax load you had at the time, you got a proportionate share of the property tax generated. So obviously in case of Pasadena, they're a much higher tax city, so they got more property tax moving forward. Now, bear in mind, these have been reduced through the ERAF movement in the 90s, which shaved off layers of property tax that went to the schools that we've never received back.
So had we not been transferring money from our utility to the general fund, we would have had a higher property tax.
Correct.
Which, if implemented by that SB 154, we would have been receiving a 16, 17, 18% as opposed to the 13% we're getting now.
Correct. Probably even more.
Probably even more. So there you go.
So looking at our history in the last several years of property tax, you can see, as I've said, the growth has been strong. Here's our 17-18 amount, and our 18-19 amount is even higher with the growth that we're forecasting on the property tax. Jumping into sales tax, our current sales tax rate in Glendale is 9.5%. It's administered, which, as we spoke of, the sales tax audit, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, used to be called the SBOE, State Board of Equalization. I guess they had an identity crisis and needed to change their name. So out of the 9.5%, Glendale gets 1% of that direct sales tax. So here's the split of the 9.5% of sales tax. You can see up here we get that 1%, and you can see all the different allocations through what the state gets, what the county transportation get, the AC, R&M. We have county welfare, the police augmentation fund, that's Prop 172, and then the other health and welfare, transportation, and the latest and greatest is Measure H for the homeless. So by law, there's a cap on sales tax, and currently it's 9.25%. So we get the 1% of the allocated share, and out of the 2% for local, there's 2% of this 10.25 that is allowable for local use. Thus far, a local use, we've had Measure H and then Prop A and C have come out of that 2%. So that leaves 0.75 available for local use to get to that 10.25% cap. Again, our sales tax has been strong. This amount in 2015-16 was a cleanup of the triple flip. That was long ago from the bonds that were sold back in Governor Schwarzenegger's time. But our forecast is about $45 million moving forward for next year. So out of the 10.25, as I said, we get the 2% is allocated.
Excuse me, can you go back to the chart?
Sure.
What did you say about Governor Schwarzenegger?
So way back in, I think 2004, they sold economic recovery bonds to bail the state out. And in doing so, they pledged a part of our sales tax, 0.25% of our 1%. So it was known as the triple flip, and that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But bottom line, in 2015-16, the triple flip ended, and they had a cleanup payment. So we got a one-time amount. So if you kind of drew a trend line up this way, everything above that was just one-time triple flip cleanup. So looking at the amounts that we get in special taxes on the sales tax. As I said, we get Prop A and Prop C. Those are long-standing transportation amounts that we get of 0.5%, or that is assessed in LA County. They are allocated out on a per capita basis, and we've talked a little bit in the past about Measure H and the amount that's generated, and I'll show you a chart in a minute, but all these generate a significant amount of tax in Glendale, and then it's allocated back. These top four are allocated back on a per capita basis, and Measure H is done on the homeless count. So what does that look like in terms of what's generated? So the 1% or the 0.5% that each of those tax are for Prop A, C, Measure R, Measure M, those all generate about $20 million in Glendale. And the yellow bar is what we receive back on the per capita basis. So the lion's share of the tax goes back into the county and allocated out a different way. So Glendale taxpayers or sales taxes within Glendale that are allocated generate on these 5 taxes about $90 million. We receive back about 12 in total.
That's a great deal for us, right?
Right.
Wow.
Depends which end you're on.
For us.
For us.
You're at the short end of the
Yeah.
stick.
Okay, so moving on to utility users taxes, just
Before you do that, Bob, I think it's important to talk about Burbank and Pasadena. And I think what Burbank and Pasadena, most definitely Burbank, and I think Pasadena is taking
That's coming up.
taking action on whether they move forward with a sales tax initiative or not today, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, Burbank is moving forward with that 0.75% sales tax because in talking with their city managers of both Burbank and Pasadena, the feeling is, how much do we give up in this process to the county and the state before that 3/4 is taken away from us for another measure or another initiative that we will not have complete access to. And so that has been their thought process of, looking at a ballot measure, I think coming up in November in both cities to say we want to be able to generate for Burbank $24 million and keep it within the city of Burbank, and for Pasadena to generate about $26 million if it's passed, and keep it in the city of Pasadena for the use of the services that they have in those 2 cities. And for Glendale, that amount of that 0.75% would be $30 million for use in Glendale if council ever wanted to go down the path of testing it and seeing if the community was amenable to approving such a tax.
Question? Yes. So that 3/4, the entire amount will stay with the city?
correct.
Because
Yes.
right now we get 1% of that 10%, if
Right,
let's
10 and a quarter.
round it up,
10
if
and a
it's
quarter.
10% sales tax, we get 1% of that, which is $41 million. So we generate $400 million, we get $40 million. So that 3/4% will almost be
30 million.
30 million.
$30 million, which is almost 70% of our sales tax income, which is great. Also, I did a quick calculation, just, another off-the-wall thing. If we had gone up and increased our property taxes to 18%, right now we receive 13%. If we had received 18%, instead of $56 million, we would have gotten $77 million, which is that $20 million that's being transferred. So.
And you'll see that when we do some of the Tri-City comparison, our revenue base is significantly less than both Burbank and Pasadena. And thank you for pulling me back.
Yeah, I thought I missed
The
it.
main point. Yeah, it's the sales tax thing is interesting because if another agency, and we have heard that AQMD is considering another 1/4 cent sales tax, which if passed, if a 1/4 cent, that goes against our local amount of 0.75, which they would get, and then we would get a portion back, much like the other ones where we probably wouldn't get full value for what we get back in terms of what's generated in the city. Which again, I think is why Pasadena and Burbank are going out for that 0.75% sales tax so they can keep it locally versus putting it into the county pool and getting a minimal amount back for use in the respective city.
Is there a limit on how much the sales tax can be increased overall?
10.25 is the limit, which gives us that 0.75 that's
So
left.
if we don't do that and AQMD passes a measure,
Right.
we won't get anything back. We would get
We'll
a very
get a little
small,
bit back,
very
but-
small amount.
Right, and then the amount will be down to 0.5. And then if somebody else comes along and takes another 0.25 or 5, then we're out of luck
I think
in
it's a
terms of having that flexibility.
And again, that 0.25, in case AQMD goes down that path, would be $10 million.
Because the way I see it, everything is being done by taxing people. So state comes up with all these measures and taxes everybody, and we get, like our mayor indicated last week about Measure H, that I agree 100%.
Well,
that we don't get anything compared to 10 million or 9 million that we generate. We get $200,000. So that's ridiculous. Okay, thank you. Ms. Michele.
Any other questions on sales tax?
I think we're reaching a conclusion that anytime there's a county or statewide tax measure, we should just oppose it as a blanket rule and maybe concentrate on our own local tax measures where we recover 100% of it. And we can be accountable for those monies to our residents. This is ridiculous.
Moving on to utility users tax, just by way of comparison, we've shown this before on what our rates are. We're 6.5% on telecom and video. We lowered that back in 2009 and adjusted the ordinance to make it legal, I guess. There were some issues in terms of how the ordinance was worded. You can see what the rates are for the other agencies around Los Angeles. Tends to be very high at 10% on electric and gas, although they don't have any on water or video in terms of the telecom piece. So we're, market or lower than our comparable cities. Utility users tax is solid, but it is going down a little bit with wireless and traditional TV, which helps generate the utility users tax, is going down on what's known as OTT, or over-the-top television. It's basically through the computer, so less and less people are using the charter communication type TV services and paying that tax. Hotel, TOT, we're at 12%. That went up from 10% when it was voted on. Council put it out to ballot in 2015 and was passed. So that has increased a fair amount. We have 25 hotels currently in the hotels, motels in the city that generate that tax. We actively audit the hotel owners to make sure that they're paying their fair share because this is a local controlled tax.
How often do we audit them?
We have a cycle every 3 years. We have a consultant that goes out and does that. We have found a few that owe tax. So try and keep them honest. Franchise tax is a small player, but it is.
And did we collect any money so far?
Yes, we have.
How much?
The one we had an agreement for $165,000 in installments.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, the last audit we did, we collected collectively about $225,000. And that included maybe about, I want to say about 5 hotels, motels.
The one in particular was significant, however.
You mean you can't mention the name?
No, unfortunately,
We'll have a
cannot.
discussion.
Or not.
Franchise tax is a small player. We get franchises from SoCal Gas and some pipeline companies and Charter Communication. It doesn't amount to a lot in the general fund budget. And then we have our miscellaneous categories with dog permits, our various charges for services, cost allocation that we do that charges the cost to outside the general fund for general fund services. And then, of course, fines and forfeitures, which is primarily traffic safety fines. So looking at the Tri-City comparisons, what our total area is, a number of parcels, 30 square miles in Glendale compared to 17 and 23 respectively for Burbank and Pasadena. Taxable value is $30 billion in Glendale, $23 billion in Burbank, and $29 billion in Pasadena. And then the split of the taxability amongst commercial, residential, industrial, very, very similar, 87, 88% residential. The remainder is commercial, industrial. And the median home value, so you would think, they're quite high and going up, $900,000 in Glendale, $940,000 in Pasadena, $830,000 in Burbank. Again, though, we get less of that assessed value from the tax generated on property tax. So general fund budget, what does that look like when we look at all the taxes generated? And again, this is 17-18. Our comparison in terms of what we get, that $213 million. Burbank's 164, and Pasadena is actually higher at 236, even though it's a smaller city with less population. So on a per capita basis, what do we generate in terms of Glendale and for general fund purposes? A little over $1,000 per capita in Glendale. Burbank's tax base gets them to $1,572 in terms of per capita revenue generated, and Pasadena leads the pack at almost $1,700 per capita with their property tax or their tax base. So what opportunities do we have? We've talked a little bit about the sales tax. Can we tap into that 0.75 of local sales tax? That probably generates the most in terms of what it would do for 3/4 of a cent. Business tax, we've looked at that a number of times. That has consistently been not a pleasurable thing to go down in terms of doing a business tax. We're one of the few cities that does not have one. Parcel tax, we've talked about that. I don't think that generates a lot compared to what a sales tax would be. Transient parking tax, Burbank has a 12% parking tax. It generates a fair amount of money. That was primarily directed towards the airport in generating that tax. And then again, special assessment districts, if we wanted to go down that path, there are additional impact fees, development impact fees as well. We have now for parks and library, but they can be put in place for other facilities or police and fire, and so on and so forth.
Good question. The transient parking tax, what would you envision in Glendale? I mean, Burbank has the airport, of course they get 12%.
Yeah, we've looked at that. Here's a kind of a recap. If you look at transient parking tax down the line here, if we implemented between 10 and 12%, it would generate only about $1 million a year, depending on what we taxed and what exemptions we gave in terms of monthly parking and medical parking. And that's kind of what Burbank did. They have the airport, which is a huge generator. We just don't have that amount of parking in Glendale, I think, to generate that.
That's my question. Transient parking tax. I'm sorry. Transient parking tax will be implemented to what project or what properties, since we don't have a facility like airport?
I think it would be citywide of all parking structures, but then if you exempted monthly parking and medical parking, I think is what primarily Burbank did, then you would get to that true transient parking, those that go out, just to park and go see a movie, pay for parking, you get that 10 or 12% tax on top of that. I just don't think it would generate that much based off the number of spaces we have. Armen did an inventory and got all the number of spaces and made some assumptions on what the amount of level of occupancy would be of the spaces. It's not a huge generator.
Yeah, especially that most of our city parking structures are 90 minutes free.
Correct.
And that's one of the reasons that no one is building a parking structure here in the city as a business, because they have to compete with the 90 minutes free of the city structure. So something to think about.
So again, on this summary page, you can see the big bang for a buck would be that 3/4 cent sales tax would generate that 25 to 30 million. A business tax, depending on how it's structured, if we want to go down that road, would be 5 to 6 million. Again, all these taxes has to go out to a vote per Prop 218, Prop 26. Parcel tax, depending on how it's structured, probably $3 or $4 million. And likely probably a special tax if we went down that road. So that's a recap in that respect. So any questions before we move on to the org profile?
We would take questions. We would take questions, comments, direction if you wanted us to look at anything further. If council had any interest in looking at any one of these items, and if it was for this year, there's of course timeline issues with elections, et cetera. And so if there's any sort of interest, we'd sure welcome any sort of feedback today or at any of our study sessions, and we could always bring back another specific report related to revenue options.
Quick question on sales tax. Who are the largest sales tax generators? Is it Galleria, Americana, car
It's
dealers.
a secret.
Who else?
It's a secret. We're not supposed to know.
I would say in general, the retail is our strongest retail and car dealers without
Oh,
getting
I'm sorry,
specific.
I wasn't supposed to name anything because.
I mean, by
I think it's
categories,
in public record, I mean, what the.
no, it's not public.
It's not,
By,
okay.
by
It
category.
was just my own
It's
personal.
okay.
By
guess.
categories,
Okay.
our
I
strong
stand corrected.
producers are our retail base, you can connect the dots there, and our car dealers. Those are our primary sales tax.
Retail
producers.
based on car dealers. So it's not, if this sales tax, quarter of a point, three-quarter of a point sales tax, if it's going to be discussed or what have you, it's not gonna impact the fees on utilities or anything else. It's just the sales tax, basically.
It's a
what we
pass-through to
purchased.
the,
Right.
to the retail.
Generated by retail and
I
car
will
dealers.
say there is a nuance, just full disclosure, when somebody buys a car, their sales tax follows them. So if somebody comes
Sure.
up from San Diego to buy a car in Glendale, the amount of sales tax they pay is based off the rate of their zip code. So it's not 100% pure in terms of they buy a car here, they pay the Glendale rate. We still get the 1%, but the extra Prop A, Prop C, Measure H, those don't get assessed to that individual because they don't live in LA County. So it's not a complete
So
one-to-one.
if we increase, if you pass our own measure, that
Then we
is,
get the full one and if we did a three-quarter set, we get the one that the state mandates, and then we get that full 3/4% for a local tax.
even if they come up from San Diego and purchase a car
Correct.
here.
Is that correct? No.
No?
I'm being shit.
No, if
I'm being waved off.
If I can just clarify it, so like
He's the
Bob
expert.
said, it just follows the zip code. So wherever the vehicle is registered, that's the tax you'll be paying. So if somebody lives in Glendale and our sales tax is 9.5%, and then they go to Pico Rivera, where the tax I think is 10.25%, so they'll pay 9.5%. So the state collects that 9.5 and then turns around and gives us our 1%. So if our sales tax were 10.25% and somebody went to Alhambra to purchase a vehicle and their sales tax is 9.5, then that person will pay 10.25% because the vehicle is registered under that
Glendale, so-
address.
Okay,
Yes.
I had it backwards.
And so wherever you go, that sales tax basically follows you.
So this will affect mostly the retail sales that it's being generated, the sales tax is being generated in Glendale, not just the cars. I'm talking about this,
This point of
different-
sale, yeah.
Right, point of sale. So
Correct.
even if somebody comes from San Diego and goes to one of our retail areas, no names, and purchase something, will pay the taxes in Glendale.
Correct.
Thank you.
So let me just add my question onto that. That's only for large traceable items such as
Registered.
autos or anything else like that. So I think before council can really start to comprehend the effects of a increase in sales tax, we would need to know perhaps what the additional annual burden would be on any particular, on a per capita basis. You know, when they were pitching Measure M and Measure R, they were saying, well, it's the cost of a, double latte every day. Wouldn't you rather give a double latte for greater transportation? So what would it mean for the Glendale community? What would it also mean in terms of lost sales, if any, for our retail folks, to the extent that some people shop their sales tax? I can go to LA and buy that big screen TV for 2% less than I would be paying here in Glendale. Some people make that choice, if there is any of that going on.
There may be some, I don't think there's a lot. People typically look at the price and don't worry about the tax.
Yeah.
But if both our neighboring cities raise the rate, we wouldn't have that much. I mean, when we
Right.
raised ours, then it's pretty much an
Wouldn't have
even
any
playing field.
loss. Okay.
Okay, on to org profile. Save the good stuff for last. So I will go through this rather quickly. We've shown this every year, just to kind of update in terms of where we are in population, number of FTEs, total citywide. We're at 1587 last year. We're proposing 1588 with a net additional 1. General fund FTEs is 879, going up to 894, and again, that was some reallocation within the various departments to the general fund. Total proposed budget for 18-19, 920 million, and we'll go through the detail of all the departments and slice and dice that. Residents served per FTE, all funds is 127, remained constant. Dropped a little bit on the general fund. Residents served per general fund, 226. Total budget, all funds, is 4565, up from 4148. Total budget per capita general fund is 1,066 last year, up to 1129 this year. Looking at the different categories we have: public safety, public works, community development, quality of life, and administration and internal service. You see a year-to-year comparison. The big change in this year is all the transportation moved back to public works from community development, hence the dip in community development and the large increase in public works. Again, the total without the transfers is $888 million. So looking at the other categories in general fund, as we've shown, the salaries and benefits for 18-19, 278 million, up 8.3%. We've gone through the changes in there. Maintenance and operations, 505 million. The total operating cost, 783, and the personnel ratio, the target of 35, we're at 35.6. Employee count again is 1588. Looking at the general fund, total salaries and benefits, 176 million. M&O, maintenance and operation, capital outlay is 47 for that total of 223. The ratio is 78.6 of personnel to operations. Obviously, the cost of the salary and benefits has gone up, so the ratio has changed a little bit. Employee count in the general fund has gone from 879 to 894. What we've shown in the past on the management, non-management count, we're still about 17% management, non-management, and that's a definition. We don't include frontline supervisor and technical professional. Those are in the non-management category. The true management defined is at 172 out of the 1588. So wanted to spend a little bit of time just to remind the council the different types of funds. There's two main categories of funds, fund types in governmental accounting. Obviously, the general fund is the primary fund. That's a governmental fund, but there are other governmental funds, and then those exist for based on tax bases or tax receipts and grants and other income. Proprietary funds operate like a business. They're based off fees charged to the recipient for a one-to-one benefit. So electric fund is a proprietary fund. Within those, each of those categories, and the governmental funds further break down, obviously the general fund, we have special revenue funds, which primarily are different grant funds that we get from the state and federal government. They can only be spent for that grant purpose. So if it's CDBG or Meals on Wheels or whatever the grant is for, it can only be spent on that purpose. And I think we have about 35 special revenue funds. Debt service fund, we have one. That's for the police building. We still owe about $30 million, and we put money into there to make the debt service payment for that debt that we have outstanding. Capital improvement funds, there are a variety of them. We have Fund 401, which is our general capital, and then we have specific capital improvement funds for like the development impact fees that can only be spent in those specific categories. Proprietary funds, there's two subcategories. Obviously, the enterprise funds, so refuse, sewer, electric, water. In our case, those are external customers, and then we have the internal customers, which are all the different departments of which we provide. The internal service departments provide services. ISD, legal, treasury are all wrapped in not treasury. ISD, insurance, medical benefits, those are all within the internal service funds, and we charge back to all the user departments. So looking at the numbers for all the categories in terms of the governmental funds, general fund, obviously the 227 that we're looking at for 18-19, the increase of 12.7 million. Special revenue funds total $110.8 million. The debt service fund at 2.6, and capital improvement 28.4. Within the enterprise funds, there's 433 million proposed for this year. Lion's share of that obviously is in electric and water. And then internal service funds, again, all those internal service departments, 117 million for a grand total of $920 million in the various fund categories. Department recap for general fund. You can see by department what the proposed budgets are and what the breakdowns are and increases. Administrative services went up because we had several individuals charged out to the Munis project. That's slated to end in January, so that budget is coming back to finance this coming year. Other increases, we've gone through the 4 additional planners in community development, some of the additions in police and fire. Again, totaling out to that $227 million, which is a $12.8 million increase over last year. Moving into the special revenue funds recap, and there's pages of these. I won't go through all of them. I think they pretty much speak to what they provide in terms of the grants that funding at the housing assistance, the CDBG, workforce, Verdugo Jobs, Glendale Youth Alliance. Those are all accounted for in the special revenue funds, and again can only be spent on those particular fund activities. Other large ones, we've got the Measure M, a lot of transit throughout with AQMD fund, San Fernando Landscaping Fund, which is specifically for the landscaping on San Fernando. Measure R, both local return and regional within special revenue. We've got Prop A, Prop C. Some of that money funnels into the Transit Utility Fund for bus operations. Asset Forfeiture Fund from the Police Department. We have special grants that account for DUI, checkpoints, items like that. Supplemental law enforcement goes into a grant fund, and they do special programs with that. Mutual aid, we usually get some reimbursement back when we send the fire department out. Special events for cruise night and some of the other things that we have throughout the city go through the special events fund. Nutritional meals, kind of self-explanatory. Electric Public Benefits Fund. We'll have a discussion next week on PBC and what that's funded. That's the solar rebates and other programs that are funded by, I think, a 2% rate on top of the electric, and it goes for solar and other programs that we have throughout the city.
Is that Fund 291? Which fund is that?
That's 291, correct. Mm-hmm. And we'll, again, have that presentation next week. Mr. Zern's got something geared up. Hazard disposal and then parking is another large special revenue fund. Again, what we collect, we spend on parking facilities within the city and the operations. Debt service, the one debt service fund we have, $2.5 million, $2.6 million in there to make the bond payment or the debt payment for the police building. Into our capital improvement funds, as I mentioned, 401 is our general catch-all capital improvement fund, and we divide it up by departments in terms of what is being appropriated. This does not include money that's already been appropriated in that fund. These projects tend to take multiple years. This is just what we're proposing for this year to be added into the overall appropriation of 401, and we'll show those projects in study session number 3, all the amounts that are budgeted for those projects.
Quick question. Haven't we paid off that police building yet?
No.
I mean, like, how much longer?
I wish.
What was the original cost? I mean, this has been...
The original debt was about $60 million, so we paid down about 30. We still owe about 30. We have...
It's 20 years old, isn't it?
We have about 16 years left on making payments.
No, we have 14 years. It was built, it was 2000 is when we incurred the debt.
Did we have any
30.
opportunity to refinance those bonds? I mean, when
We
the
have
interest did?
refinanced the debt a number of times. We're at a very inexpensive, a floating rate through Bank of America.
Because
It's
this will
about
free us,
1.4%.
I mean, let's, yeah.
I would love to find the money to pay it off, but we have 17 million in the fund against 30 million in debt, so we're about 13 million short.
Okay.
We have to renew that this coming year, by the way, so we'll
I'm sorry,
be
you have $17 million in which fund?
in the debt service fund in cash. So we augment it with transfers in from the general fund to make the debt payment. Because we dipped into that fund, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago to refloat the insurance fund. So we kind
So
of
if you
brought
use that,
Peter to pay Paul.
can you use that $17 million and pay down the debt?
We could, but then we have no reserve left. So we've been trying to match the deposits from the general fund with what we have and interest earned, and we've run different scenarios to try and make sure that we have enough in that fund to ultimately pay the debt off. We'll look again and see what other options we have when this 3-year term expires.
That would cut our payments by less than half.
Well, the debt,
Pay 15 million.
the rate we're paying now is very inexpensive. I think it's LIBOR, 70% of LIBOR plus 40 basis points, 47 basis points. It's very inexpensive debt right now.
But, excuse me, but that 17 million doesn't generate any interest, does it?
Yes, it does. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's in the pool. Rafi's getting about 1.9%, 1.8% right now. So it is generating, so it's kind of keeping pace with what we're paying in debt, but we don't have all the principal money. Okay, moving on to the other CIP funds that we have, gas tax. Obviously, money we get through gas tax, obviously. We pay for street repairs. We got the development impact fees, park mitigation, library mitigation for specific to library and parks, and then CIP reimbursement, San Fernando quarter tax share. That's a kind of a remnant from the redevelopment days. Total CIP appropriation for this year is $28.4 million. Million. Moving on to our enterprise funds, sewer is appropriation going up from 32 to 39 million this year. Refuse 28, very flat, actually a reduction this year. Electric, these are all our mandated charter funds that we're now budgeting to. Again, when we produce the CAFR at the end of the year, we roll these all up into the electric fund. But we budget all these various funds, the works revenue and the depreciation and customer capital and so on and so forth. Makes the accounting a little bit more challenging, but that's our charter. Same thing with water. We have the Waterworks Revenue Fund, Depreciation Fund, Customer Capital and Repair. Those are amounts paid for by developers that want a water tie-in or electrical tie-in. Those are the customer accounts. And the last enterprise fund we have is Fire Verdugo Communications. That's the operations that Fire runs over at Station 21 that does the dispatch services for Glendale, Pasadena, and Burbank as the Tri-City owners of the operation, and currently 11 contract cities throughout the region that we do dispatching for, and the budget this year is $7.4 million. So internal service funds, again, the customers for all these funds are departments themselves. It's easier to have an internal service fund so we can manage specific costs than have every department budget for vehicles, for example, or insurance. We centralize those costs. It's easier to maintain and account for and control those costs, so we put all the vehicle expense in one fund, the fleet fund, and then manage those. This includes both operations and, in many cases, the capital component to buy new police cars and fire trucks. Helicopter fund is a joint fund that we have with City of Burbank to purchase and maintain the helicopters. ISD, we have 3 funds: infrastructure, which pays for the oddly enough, infrastructure. The applications, all the software that we use, Microsoft, Munis, PeopleSoft, all our costs associated with that. Building maintenance fund pays for a lot of the maintenance and projects we have throughout the city. Unemployment insurance fund is the tab we pay for any employees that file for unemployment. Liability insurance, that's all our insurance claims. We run through that fund. Compensation insurance, that's workers' comp. We pay for all the claims that when employees get hurt through that fund. Dental insurance, self-explanatory. Medical, obviously a very big ticket. That's the city's costs and the employees' costs for medical insurance at $25 million. Vision, compensated absences, vacation, and sick leave. We run through this fund. RHSP is retiree health savings. We run through this fund. Post-employment benefit is some of the holdovers from many years ago on Medicare payments that we made, and then the subsidies when we unblended the insurance rates. And last but not least, the ISD wireless fund that we run all the costs of our radio system and radios through the ISD wireless fund. Total of all our ISD services is $117 million this year. So again, to recap, all the funds you've just seen, the general fund, all the categories, we've gone from $836 million last year to $920 million this year, divided up in all the different functions. And if that wasn't enough, we now have departmental dashboards. So this is the 3-way slice and dice of how we can present all the different budgets. This breaks it down by department and all the different funds and head count and categories from salary and benefits, M&O, capital outlay, and capital improvements by each department, and it'll list out all the funds down below. My department, Administrative Services Finance, we have 37.35 head count budgeted, total budget of $5.7 million, and we're all in the general fund as we normally are. City Attorney's Office, spread between 2 different departments, both general fund and the bit that they oversee on the liability insurance fund. Total budget of $11.1 million and 19.73 FTEs within the City Attorney's Office.
Why is the insurance fund in their office? That's
all the legal, all of the liability claims, they manage that piece of it. All the claims are filed through the Attorney's Office.
Yeah, I understand they manage it. Why isn't that just a separate fund?
It's a separate fund.
But it's
just the claims, yeah, it's all the claims and litigation. They run through that, they flow through that fund, so it's part of our department.
City Clerk, all general fund, 7.25 FTEs, total budget of $1.45 million. City Treasurer, just a bit over 5 FTEs, a little bit of hourly, all in the general fund, $793,000 for that function. Community Development, lots of funds.
Hold on. So, many months ago, we talked, when we were talking about different functions and different duties for city clerk, we said, well, let's discuss it at budget time. So if we said, although it's not an election year, municipal election, if we said we wanted stricter monitoring of the elections by the city clerk, we said, well, we're going to add to his budget and make sure he has that. Is this the appropriate time to discuss that, or is this backward? Are we looking backward, or?
No, it absolutely is the appropriate time to
Okay,
discuss.
so one of the things I discussed around a year ago was that we wanted to make sure there were appropriate staffing for the city clerk to conduct monitoring and make sure that the elections were up to the standards we were hoping for. I don't know if the city clerk has thought of those different duties and what sort of additional staffing you would need, but at some point, let's have that discussion. If you're
Mayor and council member, we are in a holding pattern only because we are uncertain as to what those elections will look like with the county taking those elections, the elections duties over in terms of at the polling locations. There's going to be a split between what the county does and what we oversee here at the city. Absentee ballots, which were a major concern for this council, I know, and were a part of the discussion that we had leading up to the election and after the election, will be overseen by the county. The county will be the ones who will send it out. So we'll have to have a separate discussion with the county as to what the city's role will be in coordination with them in terms of what we can and cannot do, in terms of what our jurisdiction is in that process. Keep in mind, we have put a measure in front of the voters, and this council has decided unanimously to consolidate our elections with a statewide primary date, moving the election from April 2019 to March 2020. So we will try to do whatever we can to best educate our voting population as to what they can do to protect their rights as voters. But in terms of staffing and what that staff will do, we have to, I suppose, think about it creatively as to what they can be utilized in doing.
Okay, well, I expressed my intent a year ago. I stand by that and stand by that commitment. So at such time as we figured it out, please come to the council and let's have a discussion on that.
Okay, community development, large department, 142 FTEs, including the 4 we've added in the planning section. Total budget, all the different funds, $66.1 million. You can see the breakdown, 17.4 in the general fund, 38 million in housing assistance, home grant 1.2 million, low mod housing 1.6, filming a little bit there 600,000, AQMD 334, the CIP piece 6.5 million for this year, again total of 66.1 million. CSP, Community Service and Parks, total of 277.92. Oh,
I'm sorry. Slide 94. Can you explain housing assistance fund?
Housing, that's section 8.
Come on up here.
Anybody? Bueller?
Section 8.
So that's the total amount that we receive from Section 8
Right.
for our city? $32 million? 30.
32 was 17, 18.
Right. This year will be 38.
38, 0 to 9 is for 18, 19, excuse me.
Okay. Thank you.
Community Service and Parks, again, almost 278 full-time equivalents, 12 million in the general fund, 1.7 in CDBG, continuum and care, 2.4 million, emergency solutions grant, 147, workforce innovation opportunity act at Verdugo Jobs, 6.2 million, 6.1. Glendale Youth Alliance, about $2 million, moving down to CIP, about 5.2 million. Parks mitigation, that's a development impact fee, 1.5, and the recreation fund, 4.2 million. Total budget, $33.4 million. Fire department, majority is in general fund, 254 FTEs, $69 million budget. Majority of it in the general fund at $59 million. Recall we collapsed the paramedic fund into the general fund several years ago. We still have the mutual aid grants, special events, and then Verdugo is the other lion's share of the fire department budget. Glendale Water and Power, the mothership, 345 FTEs, $367 million budget. Broken out through all these different funds. Obviously, the Works Revenue Fund, again, these are all the charter funds that we have to split out budget for. The Works Revenue is the Operations, and Depreciation Fund is the capital, and then we have the customer paid for electric. Again, the Special Revenue Fund, the PBC, 9.2 million. And then we have the water funds. Water Revenue Fund is the operations, the depreciations, the capital, and then we have the customer paid for a total of $367 million.
And have all these funds been renamed and reconstituted according to our charter?
They are according to the charter. That's way
Despite the best practices of the industry.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with accounting. If we were following accounting, we'd have an electric fund and a water fund. But because of the charter, we have all these other breakouts.
So, going back to GWP, maintenance and operations 240 million, and capital improvement is 54 million. For next budget study, I would like a breakdown of that and see what those.
Well, all the CIP projects we will show on the third study session. We'll go through each department's CIP and projects.
There's 3 of these?
Yes.
How many?
For your viewing pleasure.
3 or 4?
But I like to
We
have.
have 3. We're going to go over the calendar at the end, 3 with a budget hearing and adoption in the evening. So 3 during the day, and then the hearing will be at the end of May and adoption in the beginning of June.
It's because I like to have that information before that third budget study session if
Sure.
possible.
Sure.
We'll get it out to you as soon as we have it prepared, and we'll send it out to all council members.
Thank you.
On to Mr. Doyle's shop, Human Resources. Total FTEs of 25, total budget of 53 million. Only a small portion of that is in the general fund at $3 million. We put all the employee benefit operations under HR, the compensation, which is workers' comp, obviously dental and medical, vision, compensated absences, which is vacation and sick pay. We all have those internal service funds that we fund through an RHSP and post-employment benefits. Again, total $53.3 million. ISD is not in the general fund at all. It's in 3 internal service funds, as I mentioned earlier. Infrastructure, application, and wireless. They have almost 48 FTEs with a total budget of $29.7 million. IPA, our new fund, 8.6 FTEs, total budget of about $1.4 million in the general fund. Library Arts and Culture is spread amongst a number of funds. Majority of it is in general fund of $10.5 million. 74.7 FTEs in the library department, and a few smaller grant funds for a total of $10.8 million. Management Services, 26.9 FTEs. Obviously including the council, 5 at the top. Total budget of $5.4 million. Police Department, 94.7 total budget, almost 352 FTEs in the police department. The line share, 87.3 in the general fund, and then scattered throughout some smaller special revenue funds, asset forfeiture, special grants, and the supplemental law enforcement, and the helicopter operations, to name most of them, at $94.7 million. Public Works, last but not least, $157.7 million budget, 313 full-time FTE, and spread amongst a number of departments. General fund is $15 million. We have all the different transportation funds, Prop A, Prop C, Measure R, Measure M. We have parking. We have the sewer fund at $39.6 million. The refuse fund at $28.6 million. Fleet, $20 million. And building maintenance, $8.6 million. A total of $150.7 million.
Question going back, Bob, back to police. Do we have a number on the sworn officers? Is it 200, 210?
240? No, it's not. I want to say 240.
It's more.
No.
What's our number?
Taking bets, Carl, 230-something?
We should be authorized 244.
It's close.
Is it 239?
Okay. And so this brings a larger question. Although we don't have 244, we're authorized for 244.
Author as 244, I have approximately 10 vacancies.
So what do we do with all these unfilled positions? We're talking about all the FTEs, but that's what's allocated.
It's budgeted.
It's budgeted.
It's budgeted, but they're
Best
not
case.
necessarily filled in.
Correct.
Correct. We have a number
So,
of vacancies.
Explain that to us at some other, because I think that's a more in-depth discussion as we talk about fire and police and all that, but as in other departments as well. So make a little note, let's raise that at some other meeting.
Sure. I mean, I can give you the numbers. In the citywide total, as of today, we have 1588 budgeted. We have 1380 filled, 208 vacancies.
So what do we do
Citywide.
with that? So at the end of the year, is that a savings then? We count that as savings that we,
It
like
just rolls
this
back.
year, we rolled it over
Yeah.
for those different projects that we have.
Well, two things. In the 24-hour operations, like police and fire, if they have vacancies, they typically backfill with overtime. That's just the nature of the beast. Other departments, we don't burn a lot of overtime in most cases, but we spread the work out and, until you fill the vacancy.
And so it is between the vacancies, the monies are utilized for, at times, overtime, at times, hourly employees who are filling temporarily until the full-time position is filled. So there's a number of areas. And then you have some savings at the end of the year, which you saw as part of the conversation for this current fiscal year. You had some savings. And so between all of those vacancies, you will have a combination of uses. And some of it is most definitely savings.
So I guess we need to applaud the department heads for not having that urge to fill out their budget by hiring those, by showing some restraint. Is that true?
There is a very, I would say, departments want to fill the vacancies that they have in place today. Majority of those positions, if it were up to the department heads, would be filled yesterday. Majority, not all. There are some specific vacancies where the departments will hold vacant for a period of time to assess where the department is and operationally where they may need the position or if they need the position at all. As you saw in the beginning of the conversation for the budget, we have a net new one addition to the overall budget. However, you're adding more than that net new one. We've reallocated some of those vacancies from different departments into the departments that need it, such as CDD, Administrative Services, Human Resources. And so to answer the question holistically, it's difficult department by department. It would have to be answered in that manner. But I would say majority of them, Mr. Najarian, the departments would want to fill them as soon as possible. But that also comes with difficulties, as we've talked about in the past. The hiring and recruitment process is not a simple process. And a number of people may apply for a position, but to make sure that you have qualified individuals for a position is what we're seeking at the end of the day, to make sure that we are hiring a skilled workforce. And HR has a large task ahead of them in terms of making sure those vacancies are filled as quickly as possible. And they've been working very closely with the departments to make sure that they're hitting those targets.
And I would say the departments are doing what they can to keep the employees. I mean, we have lost a lot of employees to other agencies because of pay or cost sharing or whatever the issues are. But I think by and large, everybody's doing a pretty good job of keeping the lights on, so to speak. But it's a constant treadmill. We lose as many as we can hire, and the hiring process is the hiring process. We deal with what it is. And it will always have a number of vacancies in all the different funds. If that budget is not used, it falls back to the fund balance.
Okay, thank you.
Whoops. So that concludes our study session for today. All the items we went through, third quarter update, the general fund proposed budget, the revenue estimates and opportunities, a little bit of history there, and all the lovely propositions. Our organizational profile and the summary of all funds by type, as well as the department dashboards. What we have in store for you is next week we have the public benefits discussion for GWP, and we have the 3 utility rate increases, both electric, water, and sewer. May 15th is our study session number 3. We will talk about all the CIP projects. We went through a lot of the budget today. We'll go into the detail of the different projects that are on the board for this year, as well as any changes, additions, deletions in our citywide fees, and any other cleanup that we have from the first 2 study sessions. May 22nd, we have the hearing at 6 p.m., and June 5th, we have adoption at 6 p.m.
On the utility rate adjustments, we do have community meetings scheduled for both tomorrow and the day after, so May 2nd and 3rd, and GWP and Public Works will be out in the community having discussions with the community regarding both electric, water, and the sewer rates that are upcoming. And again, that topic will be discussed with the City Council at our budget study session next week, starting at 9 a.m.
Tell us where and when those are.
So tomorrow evening, Rubik and Steve, I don't remember, one's in Spar Heights and one is at Pacific. Steve will tell you exactly which one is where.
Both meetings are, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, both meetings are at 6 o'clock. First one will be at the Adult Recreation Center, and the second one will be at Spar Heights. And then for Water and Power, we will be next Monday before the GWP Commission. And then obviously Tuesday morning we'll be with you. So you'll have four public meetings on those rates. And Public Works will be with us tomorrow and Thursday, and obviously next Tuesday.
And these meetings at Spar Heights and Pacific Edison are when?
I'm sorry, Adult Recreation Center, not
Pacific Edison. That's right. I'm sorry. What day?
It'll be tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow.
Yes.
Tomorrow evening.
May 2nd.
Tomorrow evening at, okay,
and
thank you.
Thursday, May 3rd. So they're one right after the other.
Spar Heights is on the 3rd.
Spar Heights is Thursday, tomorrow is ARC.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, on these rate increases, when is the date that we have to make a decision on?
Your public hearing is on May 22nd, and as part of budget adoption, you would be making a decision on the rate adjustments as part of that discussion for budget adoption on June 5th at 6 p.m.
June 5th. Thank you.
That's all we have.
That's all you have?
That's all we have, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
Move to adjourn?
thank you, sir.
Second.
We're adjourned as of 11:25 p.m.